Hello history fans and welcome to the story of Agrippina the Younger. So the first bit of this video I'll be talking about her story, and the second bit I'll be reading from Tacitus and Suetonius, so that's why this video is so long. You can just hear me talk about it, or you can skip to probably about halfway and just hear the readings. It's up to you, or watch it all, but yeah, that's why this video is so long. So, her story comes from Tacitus's Annals from 116, Suetonius's Empress from 120, and Cassius Dio's Roman History from 230. So all the primary sources we have on her are from 50 to 200 years after she actually lived, and they're all fragmented, and they are all male writers with an agenda. But it's almost like Agrippina knew she was going down in history, and she did try to give us her own story, and she wrote a biography of which we have two fragments left. One was really tragically lost, and the other is the earliest written account of childbirth that tells us that Nero was breech. So it's really sad that we've lost the rest of her biography, because obviously we could have had her stories and her reality of her bonkers family and lifestyle, but instead we have three men writing about her who all tend to portray women as absolutely power mad. So, as with all history, we'll take it with a pinch of salt and you can interpret it how you like, but this is her story. So, her life starts in the really early stages of the Imperial Roman Empire of the 1st century. Her early life is under the reign of Emperor Tiberius, and she's part of the royal family. Now, the people didn't really like the monarchy at this point, but they didn't really fight it because they had had so many civil wars recently. So they didn't really like the family, but they went along with it. And her heritage is impressive right from the start because she is part of the Julio-Claudians. Julio comes from Julius Caesar, so their family have two gods, Caesar when he was deified, and they claim descent from Venus, and the Claudians are just an ancient family who have been rich since the beginning of Rome. So she's pretty impressive already. These two families were joined together by Livia and Augustus in a huge scandal when Augustus stole Livia from her husband while she was already pregnant. So they married these two families together, and they create this just immense amount of power that can't be questioned, which the people, again, wouldn't really like. As well as being part of the Julio-Claudian family, her parents are also Julio and Claudian. Her father, Germanicus, was of Claudian descent, and Agrippina the Elder is the last grandchild of Augustus, who was the first emperor, who is descended from Julius Caesar. So she is born in Germany because her father Germanicus is successful over there, and her mother Agrippina has 11 pregnancies in 15 years. So before she's even born, she's ultimately impressive, and I'm going to read it so I get it right. She is the great-granddaughter of the very first emperor Augustus, granddaughter of the second emperor, sister of the third, wife of the fourth, and mother of the fifth. So really, she's one of the most powerful and dangerous women of the ancient world. She is born in 15 CE, or the year 15, and is then 13 when her father suspiciously dies, and her mother is convinced that the emperor has murdered him. So her mother and her two brothers are then exiled, and she's only 13 and gone through a lot of traumatic events already, but I suppose that comes as being born as part of the Imperial family in Rome. Not making excuses, but you know. For a brief time she then lives with her grandmother Antonia and her great-grandmother Livia, the wife of Augustus, the first empress, and if you know their stories you'll know that this household would have been a very scary and powerful women's household, as they were all living through pretty epic, important turning points of history. Still at 13 years old, she then marries Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus. Ahenobarbus means redbeard in Latin, if that interests you. And it will make sense if you then know who his son is. But not only is he 30 and a second cousin, he's also an horrifically brutal and horrible man. So he once had an argument with a man in the forum and ripped out his eye, had a slave killed for not being as drunk as him, and ran over a child with a chariot just for fun. They get married in the year 28, I believe. Does that math add up if she's 13? But anyway, they while after, Tiberius dies, and so her brother Caligula becomes emperor. And it's then 10 months after Caligula becomes emperor that she has a child, and that child is Nero. When Caligula's emperor, he glorifies his mother's memory and actually is quite good to his sisters at the start, as the three of them become the first women to be put on coins, with their names as well. And he gives them the rights of the Vestal Virgin, so you literally can't touch them. And he also adds them to the oath, so you have to say in the name of the emperor and his sisters, which does lead to all the incest rumours that are created to sort of as a defamation of his character. But it's believed he was actually just loved his sisters, but then Drusilla dies, and that is what some people think sent him into his madness. After Drusilla dies, he actually bans people laughing or having dinner with his parents, so even though he's good to his sisters, he is an awful emperor, as were a lot of them. But Agrippina and Livia are then caught plotting against him because he's not a good emperor. When Caligula is going to Germany to glorify his father's memory, he catches them, so they are exiled. When they are exiled, they are sent to Persia, and her husband, Ahenobarbus, dies of dropsy, but she doesn't really seem too fussed, but she's not really suspicious because how she can't have caused that, but she does miss Nero. Caligula is then murdered, and Uncle Claudius becomes emperor, so he brings back Agrippina and Livilla. I think I said Livia earlier. It's Agrippina and Livilla. He brings them back because they all agree that Caligula was a bad emperor. But they do, however, dig him up and then give him a proper burial funeral. But before he died, Caligula arranged for Agrippina to marry a man called Passienus. I don't know why I said man then. I think I was thinking of the next word. To marry a man, Passienus, who is actually forced to divorce the woman he's already married to, who happens to be her sister-in-law, or Ahenobarbus' sister. Pliny's natural history tells us that Passienus was once caught giving wine to a tree to try and get off with it. So it's likely Agrippina just found him a pain and a bit annoying because he was funny in the Roman way that she wouldn't really have appreciated or enjoyed. But she does convince him to adopt Nero, which means when he dies, Nero will get all his wealth and power, and he then, shortly after, conveniently dies. But there's no accusations made that she actually had anything to do with it, and it genuinely might be a coincidence. The only reference we have to it possibly being her to do with it comes from a 4th century scholiast who actually is talking about the wrong person the entire time anyway. So she might actually genuinely not have anything to do with his death. But we never know. So Nero inherits all his land and money, and Agrippina is once again a widow. But never fear, Emperor Uncle Claudius was there to save the day, and they got married on the 1st of January in the year 49. I don't know why I just couldn't remember that year. 49. They get married. He's 50, she's 30. But all is good, she's now an empress. Claudius already has an heir, however, his son Britannicus, but very quickly, within a few months, Nero is adopted and given the title Nero, so that hopefully he will take precedent over Britannicus as heir. And Claudius's daughter Octavia is adopted out of the family so that Nero can marry her, which means that Nero is Claudius's great-nephew, adopted son and son-in-law all at the same time. And by he's 14, he has many different official positions and titles, and Agrippina keeps all supporters or sympathisers away from poor Britannicus. She is now the most powerful woman in the empire, and even though women in Roman law are perpetual minors who can't make business decisions or sign any contracts on their own, Claudius is weak. She puts herself in all the situations where she'll be the only woman there, like in courts or important meetings, and she gives herself the power to make the decisions. Appearing in public a lot also gave her active power. Before Nero marries Octavia, however, she is betrothed to someone else, but Agrippina quickly solves that by having him and his sister accused of incest, so he has to kill himself in order to keep his honour. Emperor Claudius is now 63 and gets very poorly and dies. Now, Cassius Dio and Suetonius tell us that he realised his wife was an awful person and a murderess and all these terrible things, so she has to kill him to protect herself. Now she hires the most famous poisoner in the Roman Empire, Locusta, to help with the poisoning. So apparently the doctor's in on it as well, and Claudius is fed poisoned mushrooms, but he then throws them up. So the doctor then takes poisoned feather quill down the back of his throat, I suppose to pretend to help him throw up, but that's also poisoned, and Claudius then dies. This means that Nero then becomes the 5th emperor of the Roman Empire at age 18 or 19. Now Agrippina expects that she'll be able to be the authority figure or the regent standing by his side, just as she did with Claudius, but this time she's got more experience, so she'll be in charge. But Nero was very influenced by the philosopher Seneca, who was his tutor, who taught him that women's place was not in the throne room, and Nero had also grown up seeing how meddlesome Agrippina was, and they sort of became enemies. Nero is pretty quick to tell her that she won't be part of his reign anymore, so there's a delegation from Armenia that arrive to solve some issues with Nero, and Agrippina walks into the meeting expecting to sit there next to him like she did with Claudius. So it's at this point that Seneca pushes Nero to either side with him and kick her out, or to just let her carry on. So Nero takes her out of the room and tells her she's no longer going to be part of his administration. And to make it worse, as an apology, he gives her a very pretty dress, which is just insulting, and also she doesn't like luxuries and her dresses were always very simple. Nero then hires Locusta to kill his brother Britannicus, and Agrippina is removed from the palace in a very public split from Nero that her enemies then start to see as a weakness, and they start conspiring against her. So Domitia and someone else whose name I can't remember, they hire an actor to burst into a party that Nero is hosting and to declare that Agrippina is conspiring against him. Now they're hoping that Nero is drunk and will have her killed, which he was, but Seneca comes in at just the right time and calms him down and tells him to go to bed. And then the next day, Agrippina has a private meeting with Nero in which she manages to talk her way out of the accusation, so her name is cleared, and she manages to get her and her friends a place back in the palace, and Domitia is exiled. It's at this point that Nero decides she must die, but no soldier will stab her or kill her because she's Germanicus' daughter and he has good popularity with the people. So her heritage kind of saves her in that regard. So Nero wants her to die in a tragic accident so he can claim her popularity and still use her image and be the really sad mourning son that everyone will feel sorry for. So his first plan is that he wants the top of her bed to collapse and crush her in a freak accident, but that doesn't work. His second plan is the collapsing boat. So they are on holiday, can't remember the name again, useless, but they're on opposite sides of the bay, so Nero invites her for dinner, so she has to get a boat across the bay. Now the boat does collapse and they all get stuck in the sea, but Agrippina just swims home, like she's fine, she just swims, but her poor handmaiden is really struggling and can't really swim, and she's shouting, "Help me, I'm Agrippina," because, you know, she thinks they'll help the Empress, but she actually apparently gets beaten to death with an oar. So Agrippina sends a message to Nero saying, "Don't worry, I'm okay, you know, freak accident, don't know what happened, I'm okay." And at this point Nero panics and throws a dagger down next to the messenger and says, "Oh my god, she sent this man to kill me, she must die." So then people are sent across the bay to kill her, and that is now how she dies. But Tacitus tells us that when she answers the door she says, "If you're here to ask if I'm alright, I'm alright. If you're here because Nero has sent you to kill me, I don't believe you." And they smack her over the head with, I think, like the bottom of a sword, but she just gets back up and says, "If you're going to kill me, stab me here," and points to her womb, which I'm not sure I believe, because she doesn't seem like that kind of woman to be like, "Kill me here because he's done this," but who knows. Anyway, so then yeah, they stab her there, and that's how she dies. And this is in the year 59 AD, so she's only 44 years old when she dies, and there are stories that she then goes back to haunt him in his sleep, and that Nero never goes back to the Bay of Bio because he can hear her screams or her crying over the waves. There's also stories that when she was pregnant with Nero, she went to a fortune teller who told her that her child would kill her, but she said, "That's fine as long as he reigns." So then maybe she would have said, "Stab me in my womb," because he was the cause and she was expecting it. Who knows? And a little fun fact to end the video is that she founded Colonia Claudia Ara Agrippinesium, which is now Cologne. So now we'll find some of the references to Agrippina in Suetonius. So this is from Claudius's reign section. It says, while planning his incestuous marriage with Agrippina, he made certain most unsuitable public references to her, such as "my daughter and foster child, born and bred in my lap, so to speak." And shortly before adopting his stepson Nero, as though this were not wrong enough, when he already possessed a grown-up son, he gave out with pride more than once that nobody had ever yet been adopted into the Claudian family. And then it tells us more about Claudius and how he was a bit dim. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but that seems to be the overall feeling for Claudius. 43. In his last years, Claudius made it pretty plain that he repented of having married Agrippina and adopted Nero. For example, when his freedmen congratulated him on having found a certain woman guilty of adultery, he remarked that he himself seemed fated to marry wives who were unchaste but remained unchastened. And when he came across Britannicus, he embraced him repeatedly with deep affection. "Grow up quickly, my boy," he said, "and I will then explain what my policy has been." 44. Soon afterwards he composed his will and made all the magistrates put their seals to it as witnesses. But Agrippina, being now accused of many crimes by informers as well as her own conscience, prevented him from doing anything further. Most people think that Claudius was poisoned, but when and by whom is disputed. Some say that the eunuch Halotus, his official taster, administered the drug while he was dining with the priests on the Capitoline Hill. Others, that Agrippina did so herself at a family banquet, poisoning a dish of mushrooms, his favourite food. An equal discrepancy exists between the accounts of what happened next. Many authorities assert that he immediately lost his power of speech, suffering frightful pain all night long, and died shortly before dawn. A variant version is that he fell into a coma but vomited up the entire contents of his stomach, and was then poisoned a second time, either by a gruel, the excuse being that he needed food to revive him, or by means of an enema, the excuse being that his bowels must be emptied too. Claudius's death was not revealed until all the arrangements had been completed for his successor. As a result, people made vows for his safety as though he still lived, and a troupe of comic actors were summoned under the pretense that he had asked to be diverted by their antics. And it then says how he was given a princely funeral and officially deified, an honour which Nero later neglected and then cancelled, but Vespasian restored. One more Agrippina. Then we have the Nero section. There's a lot about Domitian, Ahenobarbus. I'm surprised there's not more mentions of Agrippina, to be fair. But, like we said at the beginning, these male historians probably don't care about her very much, or just want to make sure she seems a bit bonkers and evil. Now, number 6. Nero was born at Antium on 15th of December, 9 months after Tiberius' death. The sun was rising, and its earliest rays touched the newly born boy almost before he could be laid on the ground. People at once made a number of ominous predictions, and regarded as significant a comment made by his father Domitius in reply to friendly congratulations, namely that any child born of himself and Agrippina was bound to have a detestable nature and become a public danger, which we all know is true. Another promise of ill luck occurred on the day of his ritual purification. When Agrippina asked her brother Gaius, Caligula, to give the boy whatever name he pleased. He glanced at his uncle Claudius, later emperor and Nero's adopted father, and said with a grin, "I give him Claudius's name." Since Claudius was then the butt of the court, Agrippina was not amused and ignored the suggestion. At the age of 3, Nero lost his father and inherited 1/3 of the estate. But Gaius, who was also named in the will, not only took everything but banished Agrippina. Nero therefore grew up in very poor circumstances under the care of his aunt Domitia Lepida, who chose a dancer and a barber to be his tutors. However, when Claudius succeeded Gaius, Nero had his inheritance restored to him in full, and a legacy from his stepfather Crispus Passianus left him well off. His mother's recall from banishment allowed him to enjoy once more the benefits of her powerful influence. So much so that the story got about that Claudius's wife Messalina, realizing that Nero would become a rival to her son Britannicus, had sent assassins to strangle him during his afternoon nap. They were driven away in terror, people said, by a snake which suddenly darted from beneath Nero's pillow. But this was a mere surmise based on the discovery of a sloughed snake skin close by. Agrippina persuaded him to have the skin set in a golden bracelet, which he wore for a long time on his right wrist. After she died, he threw it away because it reminded him too vividly of her, but when his situation grew desperate, he hunted for it in vain. Then we have some more about Nero. And then Nero's reign. And then it says when Claudius dies. So number 9. Nero started off with a parade of virtue, giving Claudius a lavish funeral at which he delivered the oration in person, and then deifying him. He also exalted the memory of his father Domitius, and turned over all his public and private affairs to Agrippina's management. On the day of his accession, the password he gave to the military tribune on duty was "the best of mothers," and she and he often rode out together through the streets in her litter. Nero founded a colony at Antium consisting of praetorian veterans, augmented by a group of rich, retired preliminaries, whom he had moved, blah blah blah, blah 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 blah. Is there any other Agrippina references? I don't think so. I'm really sorry if you can hear my brother talking. He's downstairs. There's like 2 doors between us. He's so loud. So I think that's all the brief mentions of her until we get to when Nero then starts conspiring to kill her. So this is 34. With the section rather than page number. I can't remember the academic name for it. Anyway, the over-watchful, over-critical eye that Agrippina kept on whatever Nero said or did proved more than he could stand. He first tried to embarrass her by frequent threats to abdicate and go into retirement in Rhodes. Then, having deprived her of all honour and power, and even of her Roman and German bodyguard, he expelled her from the Palatine, after which he did everything possible to annoy her, sending people to pester her with lawsuits while she stayed in Rome, and when she took refuge on her country estates, making them constantly drive or sail past the windows, disturbing her with jeers and catcalls. In the end, her threats and violent behaviour terrified him into deciding that she must die. He tried to poison her 3 times, but she had always taken the antidote in advance, so he rigged up a machine in the ceiling of her bedroom which would dislodge the panels and drop them on her while she slept. However, someone gave the secret away. Then he had a collapsible cabin boat designed which would either sink or fall in on top of her. Under pretense of a reconciliation, he sent the most friendly note inviting her to celebrate the quinquaterus, with him at Baiae. And on her arrival, is that how you say it? It's the Bay of Bio. and on her arrival he made one of his captains stage an accidental collision with the galley in which she had sailed. Then he protracted the feast until a late hour, and when at last she said, "I really must get back to Brawley," he offered her his collapsible boat instead of the damaged galley. Nero was in a very happy mood as he led Agrippina down to the quay, and even kissed her breast before she stepped aboard. He sat up all night on tender hooks of anxiety, waiting for news of her death. At dawn, Lucius Agrippinus, her freedman, entered joyfully to report that, although the ship had foundered, his mother had swum to safety, and that he need have no fears on her account. For want of a better plan, Nero ordered one of his men to drop a dagger surreptitiously beside Agrippinus, whom he arrested at once on a charge of attempted murder. After this he arranged for Agrippina to be killed, and made it seem as if she had sent Agrippinus to assassinate him, but committed suicide on hearing that the plot had miscarried. Other more gruesome details are supplied by reliable authorities. It appears that Nero rushed off to examine Agrippina's corpse, handling her legs and arms critically, and between drinks discussing their good and bad points. Though encouraged by the congratulations which had poured in from the army and the Senate and the people, he was never thereafter able to free his conscience from the guilt of his crime. He even admitted that the Furies were pursuing him with whips and burning torches, and he set Persian mages at work to conjure up his mother's ghost and make her stop haunting him. During his tour of Greece, he dared not participate in the Eleusinian mysteries, when a herald ordered all criminals present to withdraw before ceremonies began. Having disposed of his mother, Nero proceeded to murder his aunt Domitia. He found her confined to bed with severe constipation. The old lady stroked his downy beard affectionately. He was already fully grown, murmuring, "Whenever you celebrate your coming of age and present me with this, I shall die happy." Nero turned to his courtiers and said laughingly, "In that case, I must shave at once," which he did. Then he ordered the doctors to give her a laxative of fatal strength, seized her property before she was quite dead, and avoided all legal complications by tearing up the will. After Octavia, he took 2 more wives, first Poppaea Sabina, and then Stertilia Messalina. And that's Agrippina's section of Suetonius. Now, Tacitus gives us 2 whole chapters on Agrippina, one titled The Mother of Nero and one titled The Fall of Agrippina. I'm not going to read all of it, otherwise we would be here for hours, but we'll find my favourite bit. So this is they're talking about who Claudius should marry after Messalina died. Pallas, proposing Agrippina, emphasised that the son whom she would bring with her was Germanicus' grandson, eminently deserving of imperial rank. Let the emperor ally himself with a noble race and unite 2 branches of the Claudian house, rather than allow this lady of proved capacity for childbearing, still young, to transfer the glorious name of the Caesars to another family. These arguments prevailed. Agrippina's seductiveness was a help, visiting her uncle frequently. Ostensibly as a close relation, she tempted him into giving her the preference and into treating her in anticipation as his wife. Once sure of her marriage, she enlarged the scope of her plans and devoted herself to scheming with her son Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus, whose father was Gnaeus Domitius Ahenobarbus. It was her ambition that this boy, the future Nero, should be wedded to the emperor's daughter Octavia. Here, criminal methods were necessary. Since Claudius had already betrothed Octavia to Lucius Junius Silanus Torquatus, and had won popularity for his distinguished record by awarding him an honorary triumph and giving a lavish gladiatorial display in his name. But with an emperor whose likes and dislikes were all suggested and dictated to him, anything seemed possible. Lucius Vitellius had an eye for future despots. Using his post as censor to cloak his servile fabrications, he sought Agrippina's favour by involving himself in her projects. And then there's lots about Claudius cancelled Octavia's engagement with Silanus, and he was forced to resign his office and was superseded for one of the remaining day. And then we have rumour now strongly predicted Claudius's marriage to Agrippina. So did their illicit intercourse. But they did not yet dare to celebrate the wedding, for marriage with a niece was unprecedented. Indeed, it was incestuous, and disregarded of this might, it was feared, caused national disaster. Hesitation was only overcome when Lucius Vitellius undertook to arrange matters by methods of his own. And then more about their marriage and Vitellius, and how Vitellius got them to marry, basically. These winning preliminaries were warmly applauded by the Senate. Then Vitellius proceeded. We agree unanimously, then, that the emperor should marry. The chosen lady must be aristocratic, capable of childbearing, and virtuous. Agrippina's exceptionally illustrious birth is indisputable. She has demonstrated her fertility. Her morals are equally outstanding. For the emperor, who knows no man's wife but his own, her widowhood is welcome and providential. You have heard from your parents, indeed you have yourself known, of the abduction of men's wives at an emperor's whim. The respectable arrangement which I propose is strikingly different. We can create a precedent. The nation presents the emperor with a wife. Marriage to a niece, it may be objected, is unfamiliar to us. Yet in other countries it is regular and lawful. Here also, unions between cousins, long unknown, have become frequent in course of time. Customs change as circumstances change. This innovation too will take root. So, Claudius and Agrippina were allowed to marry. When previously, I suppose they weren't. And then it tells us about their marriage and their wedding. And then tells us all about Agrippina getting rid of the emperor's enemies and women who thought they should be in her position as well. And then we come to Nero's reign, where Agrippina's violence, inflamed by all the passions of ill-gotten tyranny, encountered their united opposition. Dun dun dun. Agrippina was gradually losing control over Nero. He fell in love with a former slave, Acte. His confidants were two fashionable young men, Marcus Salvius Otho, whose father had been consul, and Claudius Seneca, son of a former imperial slave. Nero's secret, surreptitiously sensual meetings with Acte established her ascendancy. When Nero's mother finally discovered, her opposition was fruitless. Even her older friends were not displeased to see his appetite satisfied by a common girl with no grudges. Destiny, or the greater attraction of forbidden pleasures, had alienated him from his aristocratic and virtuous wife Octavia, and it was feared that prohibition of his affair with Acte might result in seductions of noble women instead. Agrippina, however, displayed feminine rage at having an ex-slave as her rival and as a servant girl as a daughter-in-law, and so on. She refused to wait until her son regretted the association or tired of it, but her violent scoldings only intensified his affection for Acte. In the end, deeply in love, he became openly disobedient to his mother and turned to Seneca, one of whom's intimates, Aeneas Cyrenius, had screened the first stages of the liaison by lending his own name as the ostensible donor of the presents which Nero secretly gave Acte. Agrippina now changed her tactics, and indulgently offered the privacy of her own bedroom for the relations natural to Nero's age and position. She admitted that her strictness had been untimely, and placed her resources, which were not much smaller than his own, at his disposal. This change from excessive severity to extravagant compliance did not deceive Nero, and it alarmed his friends, who urged him to beware of the tricks of this always terrible and now insincere woman. One day Nero was looking at the robes worn by the resplendent wives and mothers of former emperors. Picking out a jewelled garment, he sent it as a present to his mother, a generous, spontaneous gift of a greatly coveted object. But Agrippina, instead of regarding this as an addition to her wardrobe, declared that her son was doling out to her a mere fraction of what he owed her. All else but this one thing was kept from her. Some put a sinister construction to her words. And then there's a little bit more about Nero's rule. Agrippina was alarmed. Her talk became angry and menacing. She let the emperor hear her say that Britannicus was grown up and was the true and worthy heir of his father's supreme position, now held, she added, by an adopted intruder who used it to maltreat his mother. So she has turned against him. This worried Nero. As the day of Britannicus's 14th birthday approached, he pondered on his mother's violent behaviour, also on Britannicus' character. There we go again. Lately revealed by a small indication which had gained him wide popularity. And then, during the amusements of Assassination, the young men had thrown dice for who should be king, and Nero won. And then there's some, Nero noticed the feeling against himself and hated Britannicus all the more. Though upset by Agrippina's threats, he could not find a charge against his stepbrother or order his execution openly. Instead, he decided to act secretly and ordered poison to be prepared. And then Britannicus dies. And then Agrippina becomes Octavia's supporter. Constantly meeting her own friends in secret, Agrippina outdid even her natural greed in grasping funds from all quarters to back her designs. She was gracious to offers and attentive to such able and high-ranking noblemen as survived. And then Agrippina's house is deserted. There's just a lot, and I would really recommend reading it because it would take me a very long time to read all this to you. And then we have the bit about Agrippina's enemies pretended she was conspiring against her. And so when Seneca says Nero should reflect, he added that it was late and they had spent a convivial night, and that the whole story had an air of recklessness and ignorance. This calmed the emperor's fears. Next morning, Burrus visited Agrippina to acquaint her with the accusation and tell her she must refute it or pay the penalty. And then the whole story of Agrippina coming to the meeting. Agrippina's listeners were touched and tried to calm her excitement, but she demanded to see her son. That's when she talks her way out of it. Let's find the bit when she dies. Let's get to the fun bit, shall we? This is all about Nero. So, we finally get the bit when she dies. There's so much good information in here though. If I could read it all to you, I would. But finally, however, he concluded that wherever Agrippina was, she was intolerable. He decided to kill her. His only doubt was whether to employ poison, or the dagger, or violence of some other kind. Poison was the first choice, but a death at the emperor's table would not look fortuitous after Britannicus had died there. Yet her criminal conscience kept her so alert for plots that it seemed impractical to corrupt her household. Moreover, she had strengthened her physical resistance by the preventative course of antidotes. No one could think of a way of stabbing her without detection. And there was another danger, that the selected assassin might shrink from carrying out his dreadful orders. And we then get the plan of the boat. So then we have Nero pretending to make friends again. As she arrived from Antium, Nero met her at the shore. After welcoming her with outstretched hands and embraces, he conducted her to Bali, the Bay of Bali. I can't remember how to say it. Then she was invited out to dinner. The crime was to take place on the ship under the cover of darkness, but an informer, it was said, gave the plot away. Agrippina could not decide whether to believe the story and preferred a sedan chair as her conveyance to Bali. There her alarm was relieved by Nero's attentions. He received her kindly and gave her the place of honour next to himself. The party went on for a long time. They talked about various things. Nero was boyish and intimate, or confidentially serious. When she left, he saw her off, gazing into her eyes and clinging to her. This may have been a final piece of shaming, or perhaps even Nero's brutal heart was affected by his last sight of his mother going to her death. But heaven seemed determined to reveal the crime, for it was a quiet, starlit night and the sea was calm. The ship began to go on its way. Agrippina was attended by two of her friends. One of them, Gallus, stood near the tiller. The other, Acheronia, leant over the feet of her resting mistress, happily talking about Nero's remorseful behaviour and his mother's re-established influence. Then came the signal. Under the pressure of heavy lead weights, the roof fell in. Gallus was crushed and died instantly. Agrippina and Acheronia were saved by the raised sides of their couch, which happened to be strong enough to resist the pressure. Moreover, the ship held together. In general confusion, those in conspiracy were hampered by the many who were not. But then some of the oarsmen had the idea of throwing their weight on the side to capsize the ship. However, they took too long to concert this improvised plan, and meanwhile others brought their weights to bear in the opposite direction. This provided the opportunity to make a gentler descent into the water. Acheronia ill-advisedly started crying out, "I am Agrippina! Help! Help! The Emperor's mother!" She was struck dead by blows from poles and oars and whatever ship's gear happened to be available. Agrippina herself kept quiet and avoided recognition. Though she was hurt, she had a wound in the shoulder. She swam until she came to some sailing boats. They brought her to the Lucrine lake, from which she was taken home. There she realised that the invitation and special compliment had been treacherous, and the collapse of her ship planned. The collapse had started at the top like a stage contrivance. The shore was close by. There had been no wind, no rock to collide with. Acheronia's death and her own wound also invited reflection. Agrippina decided that the only escape from the plot was to profess ignorance of it. She sent an ex-slave, Agrippinus, to tell her son that by divine mercy and his lucky star she had survived a serious accident. The messenger was to add, however, that despite anxiety about his mother's dangerous experience, Nero must not yet trouble to visit her. At present, rest was what she needed. Meanwhile, pretending unconcern, she cared for her wound and physical condition generally. She also ordered Acheronia's will to be found and her property sealed. Here alone, no pretense was needed. To Nero, awaiting news that the crime was done, came word that she had escaped with a slight wound, after hazards which left no doubt of their instigator's identity. Half dead with fear, he insisted she might arrive at any moment. And then we get more story. Agrippina's messenger arrived. When Nero was told, he took the initiative and staged a fictitious incrimination. Whose car is that? I've lost where I am. While Agrippinus delivered his message, Nero dropped a sword at the man's feet and had him arrested as if caught red-handed. Then he could pretend that his mother had plotted against the Emperor's life, been detected, and in shame committed suicide. Meanwhile, Agrippina's perilous adventure had become known. It was believed to be accidental. As soon as people heard it, they ran to the beach and climbed onto the embankment. Others waded out as far as they could or waved their arms. The whole shore echoed with wails and prayers, and the din of all manners of inquiries and ignorant answered. Huge crowds gathered with light. When she was known to be safe, they prepared to make a show of rejoicing. But a menacing armed column arrived and dispersed them. Tacitus surrounded her house and broke in. Arresting every slave in his path, he came to her bedroom door. Here stood a few servants. The rest had been frightened away by the invasion. In her dimly lit room, a single maid waited with her. Agrippina's alarm had increased, as nobody, not even Agrippinus, came from her son. If things had been well, there would not have been this terribly ominous isolation. Then this sudden uproar. Her maid vanished. "Are you leaving me too?" called Agrippina. Then she saw Tacitus. Behind him were a naval captain and lieutenant named Herculius and Baritus, respectively. "If you have come to visit me," she said, "you can report that I am better. But if you are assassins, I know my son is not responsible. He did not order his mother's death." The murderers closed round her bed. First the captain hit her on the head with a truncheon. Then, as the lieutenant was drawing his sword to finish her off, she cried out, "Strike here," pointing to her womb. Blow after blow fell, and she died. So far accounts agree. Some add that Nero inspected his mother's corpse and praised her figure. But that is contested. She was cremated that night on a dining couch with meagre ceremony. While Nero reigned, her grave was not covered with earth or enclosed, though later her household gave her a modest tomb beside the road of Misenum, on the heights where Julius Caesar's mansion overlooked the bay beneath. During the cremation, one of her former slaves, Menester, stabbed himself to death. Either he loved his patroness or he feared assassination. This is the end which Agrippina had anticipated for years. The prospect had not daunted her. When she asked astrologers about Nero, they had answered that he would become emperor but kill his mother. Her reply was, "Let him kill me, provided he becomes emperor." But Nero only understood the horror of his crime when it was done. For the rest of the night, witless and speechless, he alternately lay paralysed and leapt to his feet in terror, waiting for the dawn which he thought would be his last. Hope began to return to him when, at Burrus's suggestion, the colonels and captains of the guard came and cringed to him with congratulatory hand-claps for his escape from the unexpected menace of his mother's evil activities. Nero's friend crowded to the temples. Companion towns nearby followed their lead and displayed joy by sacrifices and deputations. Nero's insincerity took a different form. He adopted a gloomy demeanour, as though sorry to be safe and mourning for his parents' death. But the features of the countryside were less adaptable than those of men, and Nero's gaze could not escape the dreadful view of that seashore. Besides, the coast echoed, it was said, with trumpet blasts from neighbouring hills and wails from his mother's grave. So Nero departed Neapolis. Thank you all very much for watching. I hope this video isn't too long, or maybe it's not long enough. I don't know. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you again soon. Bye!